So I would like to call the October 29th, 2025 meeting of the school committee to order. I'd like to recognize Westwood Media Center, which is live streaming this meeting and recording for later viewing on its platforms. And as always, thank Westwood Media Center for everything they do. And we are going to, I think I need to do a roll call. So Joanna.
Here.
Dory. Dory, I saw you, but you're on mute. I think Dory's having technical issues. There she is. Oh, can you just say here? Can I mark her as here since we saw her?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right, great.
Sorry.
Okay, and I am here. We have a quorum, so the meeting is open. And we are going to get right into the discussion item, which is the facility study presentation and discussion. I think the way we are going to work this is Tim. First, let me introduce the people on the call. We have Superintendent Tim Pivovar. We have Lema Jean-Baptiste, our finance director. And of course, we have school committee members, Joanna French, Dory Parmalee, and I am Maya Plotkin, current chair of the school committee. We are very excited to have another one of these forums. We had one in person a couple weeks ago. We have another one in person coming up. We're finding them very helpful, especially in understanding what people want to hear, what questions people have. I think by the end of this, we're going to try and put together some FAQs that we can distribute based on the questions that we're getting at these forums. So we're very grateful for people who are here. I think the way this will work is Superintendent Pivovar will present probably about a 15-minute presentation on the facility study itself, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We're going to ask people to use the Q&A feature for questions. We've just found over the years that that's the easiest way to control things. We were at the other community forum asking people to give us their name and address prior, to asking a question. We're going to ask you to do that here as well. I'll remind people of that when we get to the Q&A session, but we will be reading every question aloud and then answering it in real time. And I think Dory is going to help monitor that Q&A list for us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Pivovar, and he will talk about the facility study.
Sure. Thank you, May. I appreciate it. And thank you, May, Dory, and Joanna for being here. Thank you also to Lema for being here. And again, thanks to WMC and to Charlotte for recording this evening. This I know will certainly be available for the community as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Some of you may have seen this presentation before, but I think it's important when we, as we begin our conversation today, that we sort of frame it around where we are as a district and then sort of where we're heading. So I'm going to, sorry about that. Hopefully let me confirm with, can I just get a verbal from Maya, you, just to make sure that my screen is being shared okay here?
I do not see it.
Okay, let me try that again. Sorry about that.
There we go.
There we go. That worked much better.
Oh, wait, every time you hit present, it disappears.
Okay, so I'm not going to hit present, and we will, my apologies for the technical difficulties here, so we'll try this again. And there we go.
Oh, there we go. Now I see it.
Okay, I need to present first and then share the screen, so that works.
Okay.
So again, my apologies for that. So thank you all. Sorry, I'm just trying to minimize our folks. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done the webinar. I prefer to do these in person, but I know we want to make sure that we have access to the community. So that's why we're doing this one here this evening. So again, my name is Tim Pivovar. I'm the superintendent. Wanted to walk through where we are with our facilities master plan. I'm not going to go through all of these slides, but all of these slides are publicly available on our website. But I want to make sure that I hit certain highlights during the course of our time here today. So by way of background, we began our work in spring of 2024. We began working on a master plan that had two key goals. The first was that we wanted to identify the capital improvement needs for all of our schools across the district and create a prioritized list of that work with some estimated costs. And so that's sort of the short to midterm problems that we have as a district with our buildings. But then goal number two is that we want to develop options for a long range plan that address not just our facilities needs, but our educational needs, knowing that we needed to have a particular emphasis on and focus on Thurston and Sheehan as our two buildings in an area of greatest need. So given that need, and given the fact that there are also needs in municipal government as well, there was one designer, Doran Whittier, that worked for both the municipal side and the town side. Obviously, our focus here, our municipal side and the school side, obviously our focus here is on schools, but know that we do this work in the context of the larger community, knowing that ultimately the residents of this community, there's one pot of funds to draw our projects from. And so we want to make sure we work in collaboration and coordination with our partners at Town Hall. So our guiding principle throughout this work is that we want to find the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solutions for our school buildings so that we can continue to provide a top-tier education for our students. And I'm going to apologize for 1 second because I just realized that Dory had popped out. And so I need to re-promote her. So excuse me 1 second. Welcome back, Dory.
Thank you.
I'm going to hope that I get this right from the screen sharing perspective again. Okay, I think we're good here. So I'll come back to our guiding principle, and you'll hear me say this a lot tonight. You'll hear me say this over the next few years that we're doing this work, is that we want to find the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solutions for our school buildings so that we can continue to provide a top-tier education for our students. It's not an either or, it's a both and. We want to find solutions that are educationally appropriate, but we also know that we want to be cost effective in the way that we do that. And so you'll hear me say that again and again and again. So there are key elements to the master plan. I'm not going to go through all of the elements this evening, but we need to start with an assessment of our existing conditions. We then talked about our educational visioning to make sure that we were true to the component about being educationally appropriate. We need to look at our enrollment and capacity so that we're making decisions not just about where we are today, but about where we are going to be in the future, knowing that if we're talking about a new building, for example, that needs to last at least 50 to 60 years. And then that ultimately leads us to potential solutions and estimated costs. So from an assessment of our existing conditions, I'm not going to go through all these things. They're available on our website, but there's a capital improvement plan for each of our buildings. It identifies places in area of need, identifies cost estimates as if they were bid as standalone projects. And this is essentially the list of items that would allow us to take the existing buildings that we have and make them as good and as strong as they could be as educational institutions. And you can see they're in the areas of things like health, safety, and welfare, code compliance, accessibility, all those sorts of things. Ultimately, this chart is the one that's really informative. It takes each of our existing school buildings and gives a consumer report style rating on how they are in different categories like site and civil, exterior building elements, interior accessibility, mechanical systems, etc. Purple is excellent. Pine Hill is purple across the board. Pine Hill should be purple across the board. It just opened. And then the more green something is, the stronger it is. The more red something is, the worse condition it's in. Clearly, just looking at this visually, Thurston and Sheehan stand out as our greatest areas of need across these 11 categories. And that's not a surprise to anybody that's really set foot in either of those buildings. But it is confirmation for the work that we're talking about here. We also looked at the educational use of these buildings, knowing that our facilities are only as good as the kind of education we can deliver inside of them. And so when we think about things like capacity and enrollment, we need to not just consider gross square footage, but we also need to figure out how are those spaces used inside the building, knowing, for example, that general education spaces have different capacity than special education spaces, or knowing that if all of your square footage is in cafeteria, that doesn't help your learning spaces in classrooms, right? So we really wanted to dig in when we look at capacity, how are the buildings being used in those ways? We then have this chart which shows what our current enrollment is in each of our buildings, what the enrollment forecast is over the next 10 years, and then analyzing the space relative to MSBA guidelines. You'll hear us talk about MSBA a lot. That's the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They're the agency that helps fund school building projects across the Commonwealth. They were a great partner for us in Pine Hill basically providing us over $20 million of funding to support the Pine Hill project. And so we use those guidelines, A, because they're a good ability for us to compare across from school to school. But B is that if we hope to partner with the MSBA in the future, we want to use their guidelines to do our analysis, knowing that we will need to do that work in the future as well. The pie charts you see on the screen basically show you how are educational spaces in the building oversized or undersized relative to MSBA guidelines. Pine Hill is all green. It was just designed in conjunction with the MSBA. 100% of spaces are right-sized. But you can see at Thurston, the amount of that pie chart is red. 68% of our spaces in that building are undersized by 10% or more. And at Sheehan, it's 46%. Again, those are our two biggest buildings with the most level of undersizing relative to modern educational guidelines. So continuing, we then not want to layer our existing conditions on top of our analysis of enrollment and capacity. So, I'm not going to go into the details of how this is done, but again, we're using the MSBA guidelines for how we do this. And then we ultimately generated this information, which we're going to demonstrate graphically like this. We have these essentially fillable bar charts. The black outline identifies what the capacity of the building is based upon our classroom counts. So if you look at the left for the high school, the total capacity is 939. The yellow bar represents what our current enrollment is. When the study was done, it was 850 at Westwood High School. And the green bar demonstrates what our forecast is over the next 10 years. Green or red bar, green if it's within capacity, red if it's over. So at the high school, you can see our capacity is 939. We're currently at 850. Our mark in 10 years is 894. We're within capacity. That's a good thing considering the fact that we have one high school, and it's really not on the radar for the immediate next steps for our master plan. But when you look at Thurston, you can see our capacity is 665. As of 2024, we were at 676 when we did the study, and our projection is to be at 753. And I'll acknowledge that number is over capacity, including our modular buildings, which I'll talk about more a little bit later. On this next slide, you can see our elementary schools. There's a different bar for each of the 4 elementary schools. And you can see that right now we are within capacity at Downey, MJ, Pine Hill, and Sheehan. But you'll see that over the next 10 years, and this is based upon how our current attendance lines are drawn for elementary schools, the projection is that Downey, MJ, and Sheehan will increase in their enrollment to the point where they are over capacity, but Pine Hill will actually decrease enrollment over the next 10 years. And I realize that may be counterintuitive, considering that Pine Hill was built a certain size. When we work with the MSBA, they don't look at where our attendance lines are. They look at what our overall capacity is as a district to handle elementary school. And so there's a phenomenon that I've seen happen in my past before as well, that there is a spike when a new building opens, as it's enticing for families to move into the community in that part of town to access the new building. But so you have a higher than typical turnover rate at the beginning of when a new school opens. What happens is those families then don't move when their kids hit middle school, generally speaking. And so that population ages out to elementary to some degree, and so you wind up seeing declining enrollment about 10 years out. The important thing when we reflect on how we built Pine Hill and the size we built Pine Hill at is that right-hand chart on the screen. When we look at our overall capacity across all 4 elementary schools, it's 1,540 with the size that Pine Hill was built at. Where we forecast to be in 10 years is 1,517, which is completely aligned with what that capacity is. It means that we have the ability to meet those needs with our buildings the way they're currently constituted, but we may need to think about attendance lines in a different way going forward, and I'll have more to say about that in a little bit. This just shows you those same charts, how they look over the next 10 years. Here it's by building. The orange bars show what the capacity flux and flow is over 10 years, and the purple line shows you what the capacity of the building is relative to that. I'm going to pause here particularly on the Thurston one because you can see the increase, but there are actually 2 different capacity numbers for Thurston. One is the purple line that is including our modular buildings. Those are the temporary, and when I say temporary, they're sort of permanent temporary. They have a lifespan of about 20 years, and they've been there about 20 years. Sort of in the back of Thurston where our 6th grade wing, predominantly 6th grade wings are. The blue line, however, is our capacity of Thurston without the modulars. When we look at an MSBA project and getting into the MSBA pipeline, overcrowding is one of the things that they consider. They do not consider modulars as permanent space, and you can see that we are well over capacity at Thurston if we don't include the modulars in our count. Here's Downey, MJ, Pine Hill, and Sheehan. But again, as a whole, you can see that we are actually on target with Pine Hill the way that it was built to be in line with our capacity over the next 10 years at the elementary level, K to 5. So knowing all that, we then looked at a number of potential solutions, and we identified 6 potential solutions through our work. The first solution one, is the status quo. There is always the option to do nothing. And doing nothing is not really doing nothing, because we would need to continue to do the capital improvement work and the maintenance work we need to do to maintain our buildings. But that's the default. That's essentially, there is a cost to doing nothing, and that's what option 1 is. Option 2 would be to add modular buildings to address the capacity issues, but not do any redistricting. That would require modulars at Thurston, Downey, Martha Jones, and Sheehan. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Option 3 would be to build a new middle school, a new 6th through 8 middle school on the Thurston site, not redistrict, and that would still require modulars at Downey, Martha Jones, and Sheehan, and would just be continued repairs at Sheehan. Option 4 is to build a new elementary school. That's at either, that would be a consolidated Martha Jones or Sheehan, although a standalone Sheehan would be part of option 4 and would be explored as part of option 4. That would require modulars definitely at Thurston, and depending upon the redistricting question, potentially at Downey or temporarily at MJ. Option 5 is the same as option 3, except with redistricting. So that would be to build a new 6th through 8 middle school on the Thurston site, and then redistrict the elementary schools to use our capacity effectively in that regard. And that might, in a scenario, require modulars at MJ, but it may not, because if we're able to redistrict in the right way, we could be potentially okay there. That would not, however, address the Sheehan question other than just continued capital improvements and maintenance. And then option 6 is building a new 5 through 8 middle school, which would either be a consolidated 5 through 8 middle school or a co-located 5-6 upper elementary and 7-8 middle school on the Thurston site. By reconfiguring the grades to 5 through 8 on the Thurston site, that would then allow us to distribute our students in K through 4 across the other 3 schools at Downey, at Martha Jones, and at Pine Hill. That would result in a closing of Sheehan, but a new 5 through 8 middle school. So that would address both the Sheehan and the Thurston building needs, but would, as I'm just going to acknowledge, is the most changey option, right? Because it involves changing grade configuration and redistricting. Just to talk about the modulars, again, modulars are these temporary buildings, and these pictures show you where those modulars could go on each of these sites. The red star in each of these pictures, just to orient you for each building, is where the main entrance is. So for Downey, the modular would be, as you enter the building, off to the left, heading over towards the ball fields. For Martha Jones, it would be the essentially the blacktop area in the front of the building, where students congregate, the younger students congregate during arrival. At Sheehan, it would be in the area directly behind the main entrance. I'll also acknowledge any Sheehan modular would need to be detached, would not be able to be attached to the rest of the building because of the fire code and the fact that Sheehan is not a building with sprinklers. And then Thurston, there would be a third modular in that scenario that is added sort of off of the back of the building. You can see the 2 modulars there are in the upper left-hand corner. That's the black roof area there. And then in the upper right-hand corner, the white area there. Just to show, and these are not fully designed buildings, but it's important in this process that if we are proposing potentially building a new building on a site, we want to know, can it actually fit? And so this is a test fit for what a new Thurston could look like on the existing Thurston site. You can see the new building laid out there in the color coding. Those gray areas are parking. You can see the remnants of the old building sort of underlaid in the picture on the left-hand side of the screen. And where that new building would go in this scenario would be on top of the baseball field, and the baseball field could be replicated in that green shaded area in the top left corner of the picture. I want to acknowledge just up front, because the question may be, it seems like there's a whole lot of space on the top part of that picture on the site. Why couldn't you build back there? And unfortunately, there is a gas easement that runs right across that part of the property that would prohibit us from building across it. So we would need to fit within the constraints without being able to move over that easement. In terms of a new building on the Sheehan site, again, this is a test fit. This is not a fully designed building, but it shows you that you could build a new elementary school essentially on where the ball fields are closer to Buckmaster Pond. And then you could re-replicate those ball fields where the existing Sheehan is right now. I do want to add the caveat with this solution that the school department does not have control over the ball fields. That falls within town hall and the select board. And so this option would require a land swap with the town, which is something the town meeting would have to approve. So now that we have solutions, we want to talk about estimated costs. And I'll caveat this conversation by saying that these are estimates. And generally speaking, particularly as it relates to new construction, they are rough order of magnitude estimates. These are not fully designed buildings, but they provide comparative costs to help inform our conversations going forward. And so this is each of the 6 options. And I will say here, options 1 and 2, essentially option 1, the status quo option, everything on our capital improvement list is $191.5 million. Now, we realize we will not be able to do everything over that list in the next 10 years, but that is the prioritized list of what we can pick and choose from. That list is broken into short-term, mid-term, long-term, so essentially 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10 plus. And that would be making everything as brand new as possible. We would need to make very informed decisions about for example, a new HVAC system, which will be needed at some point at the high school. The estimates that are in there about the top of the line model make it as if it were like new. We might need to identify a more cost-effective model. So we want to acknowledge that we need to work these numbers within our budget. But again, for an apples to apples comparison, that's the liability of trying to bring everything up just by doing the status quo is $191.5 million. Option 2 is a little bit more because of the modulars, and options 3 through 6 are all in the general ballpark, all in for all of the buildings, not just new construction, for all of the buildings, roughly plus or minus 300 million. But I think what's probably more informative is on this slide, which shows you the breakdown that if you do a new school, and I've highlighted this differently than I've done on different presentations, just to call that out explicitly, that if you do a new school, what you see is somewhere, but depending upon the size of the school, the smallest project would be a consolidated MJ Sheehan, roughly 132 million. The largest project would be a new 5 through 8, roughly 177 million. But if you look up on that chart, you can see that the more new building you do, the less amount or the fewer amount of capital improvement and maintenance costs you have, right? So there's a trade-off in that conversation about building new versus what you have to do for capital improvements. This shows you that same thing for Thurston and Sheehan, the cost of what the ongoing maintenance is. So for Thurston, that CIP list is roughly $74 million. And a new building would either be 155 or 177 as a rough order of magnitude estimate, depending upon what the grade configuration is. And you can see that similarly for MJ and Sheehan. I'll also acknowledge on the slide our limited ability, even with funding, to do certain amounts of improvements at Thurston and Sheehan without triggering code compliance. That would be whether it's triggering compliance for accessibility, or in the case of Sheehan, whether it's triggering compliance with fire protection. And so the question is now, what do we do with all of this information? And really, there are 2 key decision points that are in front of the school committee and in front of the community as a whole. The first decision point is solely in front of the school committee, which is driven by the deadline to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA. The statement of interest is us saying to the MSBA, we have a problem with this building and how it supports our education in the district. We would like to partner with you to help solve that problem. And so we need to identify a priority project, and the target deadline for that submission, which happens annually, is in April of 2026. And so that first decision point is which school, Sheehan or Thurston, is the priority for that SOI. The school committee has committed to identifying that school at their December school committee meeting, so we need to identify that by the end of December of 2025, so that we can take the months of January through March, right after the new year, to actually write the statement of interest, complete the statement of interest, and then that SOI needs to be approved by both the school committee and select board before it's submitted to the MSBA in April of 2026. What happens then is if we are accepted into the pipeline, which says we are looking to potentially partner with either Sheehan or Thurston to solve our challenges, what are the key features of that priority school? And so once accepted into the eligibility period, we would then need to do a feasibility study, which would identify, are we talking about new construction or renovation or repair? What's the size? What's the enrollment? What's the grade configuration? What's potentially the location? That is really the differentiation among those options. So decision point one is saying, are we looking at Sheehan first or are we looking at Thurston first? This second decision point then identifies, if we're looking at Sheehan first, are we looking at standalone Sheehan? Are we looking at a combined Sheehan MJ? Are we looking at building new? Are we looking at renovating? If the decision point in decision one is Thurston, this decision point two identifies, are we building new? Are we renovating? Are we building 6 through 8? Are we building 5 through 8? Is the 5 through 8 a 5-8, or is it a co-located 5, 6, and 7, 8? All of those decisions take a long period of time. And so we are not, those decisions would not, if we're accepted into the MSBA pipeline in December of 2026, they'd be made by the end of feasibility in 2028, 2029. And then there would be a vote to fund that if it's new construction after that point. And so what that looks like for a generalized timeline would be, we'd submit the SOI in April of 26, start design, hopefully get accepted into the pipeline in December of 26, go through the feasibility study, start design, and then talk about construction with borrowing starting in fiscal year 2031 and occupancy in 2032. And again, I'll put this on in a different format here, which is the building details would be finalized in late 2028, early 2029. On this timeline would be a vote sometime in 2029, with construction beginning in April of 2030 and a new school occupied in September of 2032. Again, generalized timelines contingent upon being accepted into the MSBA in December of 2026. And so with all that being said, we are really seeking, and the school committee is seeking, opportunities between now and their vote in December to share our plan to gather community feedback. This is the second of our series of forums. We've been doing PTO meetings. We've got our school committee meetings, talking with other boards and committees. Our third public forum is on November 10th at 6:30 p.m. in the town library. The presentation will be very much the same, but the discussion will obviously depend on what all of you bring to the conversation. And I do also want to add, we just created a new email address, facilitiesplan@westwood.k12.ma.us, that if you email that goes, it goes to me, it goes to Maya, it goes to Lama, and it goes to my admin who helps monitor the email address. It's an opportunity, if you have questions for us, to answer the questions, or if you just have general feedback to provide to us, we're certainly interested in your feedback as well too. So with that, I'm going to stop presenting. I may need to go back to slides and pull that back up again in the future. I realize that's a whirlwind tour, and again, you can find these things on our website. But I'm really interested in the conversation that we're going to have, because ultimately this forum is only going to be as strong as the questions that you all have to bring to bear and the comments you have to bring to bear on the conversation. So, so with that, Maya, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make two additional comments, just kind of nuanced on what Tim said. The first one was on the costs. So that slide, if you recall, the one that broke down the costs between capital improvements and the modulars, and then the actual project of the building cost itself. I wanted to emphasize that on the capital improvements, whatever that number is, let's say it was 190 million. That is the sum total of all of the capital improvements that are recommended by the consultant. They are not necessarily all of the improvements that we would vote to do, right? Some of them might be nice to have, but we just can't afford them. We certainly would prioritize them. In addition, all of those costs, the capital improvement costs, would be done in phasing. It's not like a building project where we go and we would ask for $190 million at once. We would do them in phasing. We would look at our own capital, reserves and see what we have. So that number, those numbers, that line, the capital improvement plan, while they are large numbers across the board, I think it's they have to be nuanced because it's not a one-hit full amount. I don't expect that we would spend $190 million doing capital improvements. I think we would spend less than that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the timeline. The timeline we've presented, first of all, is a very tight timeline, right? it's driven by the MSBA, but it also assumes, one, that we get in right away and that everything works according to plan. So it's about it probably as tight as it can be. And the second thing I wanted to point out is that, you know, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, which is FS1, the fire station project. You know, I know that the town is exploring options for that as well. This timeline was put in place when on the assumption that FS1 probably would have been funded in 2025. It looks like now it would be funded more like 2026, 2027 if there's a second project. So how that impacts the timing of the school project, you know, we don't know yet because we don't have a project, but I did want to put that out there in terms of the timeline. I don't know if Joanna or Dory or Lemma, if you guys have anything else to add to the presentation. Don't feel like you have to.
The only thing I really want to emphasize is we are really looking for community feedback in this process, and we want to be as transparent as we can with the information we have, and we really want your feedback. We want this to be a collaborative, town-wide, community-wide opportunity for us to really think about what is the best option for our kids and for our town. So I just want to really invite people to participate in this process, to share your feedback, either, you know, in this chat format or reach out to any of us to share your feedback as well. We really want to gather that feedback. And we have not, as a committee, presupposed any one of these options as a solution. So please engage with us.
All right.
Have anything to add? I would have said what Joanna said. So
okay, great. All right. So as I said, if you have a question, please put it up in the Q&A. Use the Q&A feature. Dory is going to be reading them. And just a reminder, we are asking people to put their name and address into the Q&A with your question. So if you submitted a question and you haven't put your name and address, if you can just follow it up with your name and address, that would be helpful. All right, Dory, over to you.
We do have a couple questions. The first one is a three-part question, so I'll kind of read them one at a time. From Katie Willett at 91 Pheasant Hill Street. Can you provide a link to the capital improvement plan for the next 10 years? When I look at the website, I have only been able to find the proposal for this current school years.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to put a link in the chat to our facility study page. And I want to differentiate between the capital improvement plan that the district generates, and Lemma, I don't know if you want to speak anything more about this, versus what's on the CIP list from the architect. So if you go to the facility study page that I just put in the chat, you can get that directly from the district top tab. There's a facility study thing there. And I want to acknowledge, like, the URL actually says elementary building project. We just commandeered the old Pine Hill part of the website. But it's it is the link to our facilities plan. If you go in there and you click on the link that says see the full report, it will bring you to Google Drive, and in there you will see a document called CIP.xls, which is a tab breakdown of all of the itemized list items for each of the buildings. So when I reference being able to see the CIP on the website, you can find it through that link.
Thank you. The second question from Katie is, since the forecasted enrollment at elementary school level fits within the capacity, and from the previous forum, it was stated that they do not do the enrollment study based on neighborhood. How can you be confident in the notion that Sheehan is going to be over capacity and require modules?
Okay. So let me differentiate between because we've had multiple enrollment studies as a district. So when we did the Pine Hill project, the MSBA did an enrollment study. The MSBA's enrollment study does not differentiate by neighborhood. When we contracted with our architect, who subcontracted with a GIS firm to do our enrollment capacity here, or excuse me, our enrollment demographic enrollment projections here. Pardon my stumbling there. They did look at it by neighborhood, right? And so when we say that, there is a level of confidence in doing that because it bears out with the work that they've done in the past, that we would be over capacity with nothing changes over the next 10 years at Sheehan and at Downey and at MJ. Now, there's a couple of ways to address that. One is to not change anything and deal with overcrowding in the buildings. I know, for example, I've only been here in the district 3 years. That was the case at Downey prior to Pine Hill being built. We had things like art on a cart, which is possible to maintain the building. It's not the best educational way to approach it. So one thing is to basically do nothing and just deal with overcrowding and deal with the educational impact of overcrowding. The second option would be to add modulars. The third option is to redistrict and to address the enrollment capacity by changing the attendance lines and redistributing students into other buildings. So that's why modulars would be an option, but it's not the only option as it relates to the capacity question. And then the third question there, have we considered an all grade 5 school or K-school in one of the buildings like other towns instead of combining the 5th into the middle school? So we had some of those conversations during our educational visioning work back with Doran Whittier. I'm trying to remember who from the committee. Dory, were you on that way back in this was about a year ago or so. I forget who was a part of, we've had a bunch of committees, so I forget who was a part of which committee. My apologies for that. We did look at other potential options, and we made the determination of sort of what was on the table and what we felt comfortable with educationally. We didn't want to diminish the educational program in terms of trying to solve building challenges. I think just, the challenge when you have standalone grades in one building is you're increasing transitions for kids and you're increasing the rapid pace at which transitions are happening for kids, right? So, and so I'll just say for standalone K is a little bit easier than standalone 5, but a standalone 5 building means that a student, particularly a student that may struggle with transitions, is in one building for grade 4, is in a different building for grade 5, and is yet in another building for grade 6. And I don't think that's something that we were comfortable considering in terms of what the impact on kids would be.
I also think from a facility standpoint, it would be difficult to sort of house them with our existing facilities, right? To find a building that would just be 5th grade and be able to manage it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Thomas Tigner, 72 Conant Road. I think actually it's more of a comment than a question. Our son was an 8th grader at Thurston last year. And last year we were notified by the school about one emergency with the boiler system, one emergency due to a power outage, and one shelter in place that was eventually explained as an old food item being left too close to the air vent. I believe all these events were associated with foul odors. One of these events made the local news. Additionally, people who go to Thurston on a day-to-day basis apparently know that there are multiple rooms with leaking ceilings, with large brown discolored spots, non-functional sinks in the bathrooms, and non-functional water fountains. I have read online that Thurston was built in 1939 and had its last serious work in 2011. It seems painfully clear that Thurston is long overdue to be rebuilt and not simply renovated or patched with modulars. Let's please make this happen to keep Westwood being a great town for excellent education and youth of all ages. To be frank, this seems like a higher priority for Westwood than the fire station.
Okay.
And the next question is from Ada Zong, 73 Partridge Drive. I have a question about the CIP spreadsheet for Thurston, specifically item 5.7, which says replace the non-functioning, aging / failing air handler equipment in gym number 1 and cafeteria with new higher efficiency heat pump type equipment. Can you clarify when these air handling units stopped functioning and when the plan is to have them replaced?
So I will defer to Lemma in a second if she has anything specifically to speak about that particular item in the air handling things. I would say that just sort of from a general, let me step back to like a 10,000-foot view to the initial genesis of the study. Essentially, the context here is we know that we have issues with the HVAC system at Thurston. And we know we have issues with things like accessibility and some other issues at Sheehan. The question is, as we look to address our solutions without having a long-range plan for what our priority is and what the timeline of the priority is, then we're essentially guessing at what the right solution for repair is. And so I say that kind of the analogy I've used is that if we are replacing, it's essentially, are we using bandages and gauze or are we doing surgery? And it depends upon how long the condition is going to last. We know that if we are talking about building a new Thurston, for example, we still have a whole generation of students that are coming through that building over the next 6 to 7 years that we want to make sure that they have a safe school where they can learn, and a safe school where our staff can educate our students, right? Both need to be true. But what we might invest in are short-term patches to get us over the finish line, as opposed to investing a significant sum of taxpayer dollars in something that might get torn down 5 or 6 years later. And the same is true for Sheehan, right? Is the reason we're doing this is to help inform what kind of solutions we take, which is why I don't think we can answer a question today around what that timeline is. Now, that being said, if there are areas of immediate urgent concern that require action because we can't continue to patch for another 6 years, then we do that. So two examples of that are at Sheehan. We sought funding at last year's town meeting to replace an electrical panel that was original to the building in 1947, knowing that if that failed, there were no replacement parts available and we would not have had power in Sheehan, at least in parts of the building. So we invested in that. We did that thing. When we had the recent sewage leak at Thurston a couple of weeks ago, we not only, and knowing this is on top of what happened last year, we not only repaired that part of pipe, but we replaced, I believe, 120 linear feet of horizontal pipe in that building to make sure that we, weren't paying sewage pipe whack-a-mole, because I don't think that would have been in anyone's best interest to do that. And so that's at least a framing for how we think about this. But Lemma, I don't know if you can speak specifically around the air handling equipment.
For the current, I would say one thing is that we're constantly looking at our air handling equipment and calling in vendors to make repairs. So I would expect that our facilities department looked into both of these and has addressed them since the point when this was done, because this is maybe 6 months ago, or if not more, Tim. But I would acknowledge that the air handlers, both in the gym and in the cafeteria, are old. They're not original to the building, but the gym maybe. The cafeteria is not, but they are old equipment. I've specifically talked to Tom Carey, our facilities director, about replacing the cafeteria equipment. So that's one of the items that I would say we could pick off as part of our 5-year annual capital plan. And so we didn't really address this before, but of course, through our facilities, master plan, Doran Whittier has looked at all of the capital needs of the district. We as a district also look at equipment that has been breaking down repeatedly or has required multiple service calls, and then the importance of the space that is being serviced by that equipment. So I would say the cafeteria at Thurston is one of those areas that we definitely want to have strong air handling equipment, as well as, we use it during the day for various functions. So I think that was a priority for that reason. So it's on my list as one of those HVAC units to consider. It hasn't made the list didn't get done this summer, probably won't get done next year, but it's on our list. And this, to your point, Tim, this is why the long-term plan is so important, so that we start to make the right decisions on these shorter term judgment calls.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Wayne Nana at 5 Martingale Lane. How would all of these solutions be funded, and what would all 6 solutions do to taxes?
You want me to take that, Tim?
Yeah, I think that one falls more in your wheelhouse, Maya, than in mine.
Okay. So if we're talking about a new building, that would have to be funded by a debt exclusion. It's similar to how we funded Pine Hill and the funding that was requested for FS1. This is as opposed to an override. There's 2 ways you can fund budgets, right? An override is an increase in taxes that goes forever, right? You all agree, the town votes to increase taxes to a certain level, and those taxes remain at that level going forward. A debt exclusion is a vote to increase taxes for a limited amount of time for a certain purpose. So it's for Pine Hill, for example, it was 30 years to pay off the debt for that building. This would be the same. It would be a limited time of debt that would be incurred by the town. The taxes would be increased to pay for that period of time. And then when the time period is up, that increase would come off. So we saw this in 2023 when we finished paying off the new it's not new anymore, but the high school, we saw that debt come off. That is the same time the Pine Hill debt came on. So we were able to take, and that was strategic, right? We were able to take advantage of that to minimize the actual impact to taxpayer at the time. The library, for example, is coming off, the debt on the library, I think, is coming off probably like around 2031. Again, we would look to take advantage of that debt coming off to put some debt on to minimize the taxpayer. But that's how you would fund these buildings. The capital improvement plans would be funded through some combination of the capital accounts that we have, the capital plan that LEMA presents every single year that we then follow through with. It could be an article at town meeting, but again, that would be sort of a one-time, depending on what it is. But those would be in chunks, they would not be all at once. And in terms of what they do to taxes, all of them would increase taxes. I'm not going to lie about that. What we will be able to do, and what we did for Pine Hill, is we had a calculator on our website where you could go in, you could type in the assessed value of your house, and it would tell you what the impact to your taxes based on your property assessment would be. So you could see exactly how much your property taxes would increase. We also, in presentations, at the time, the average house in Westwood cost $845,000. And we sort of let everybody know what the impact for the average house in Westwood would be. I think that number is now higher, but so we're trying to provide as much information to people ahead of time so they understand the impact on their taxes. We would do the same here if we were to go forward with a project.
Maya, can I please add that the costs for the buildings don't include any reimbursement we might get from the MSBA, which we don't include because we don't know what the final number would get. But sharing the example from Pine Hill, we were able to take advantage of some savings through the MSBA process.
Yes.
And we would seek to do that here as well. So the numbers that we're sharing tonight don't include any MSBA offsets.
Correct. Assuming we get into the MSBA program, it would not include any reimbursement from the MSBA program. Based on Pine Hill, we would hope to get around 20% reimbursement. So if the building costs $170 million, that would be around $34 million in reimbursement. We also, in Pine Hill, we were able to take advantage of other programs, federal funding. We were able to take advantage of other source incentives. And at the end of the day on Pine Hill, when the town voted, we expected the final tax impact to the town to be around $69 million. When we closed the project out recently, we've now calculated the final tax impact to the taxpayers about $60 million because of all these sort of programs we were able to find along the way. So we would do everything we can to mitigate the tax impact on the residents. But yeah, Joanna, that's a good point.
Okay, our next question is from Ada Zong at 73 Partridge Drive. Would it be possible for the district to organize an open house so that community can visit Thurston and Sheehan in person? I've spent time reviewing the facility study, but I think seeing the building firsthand would give residents and myself a much clearer understanding of its current condition and needs. I think we did that for Hanlon and the other buildings.
Yep. So we did have, now we did it at a different stage of the project. Once we were accepted into the MSBA program, we had told the MSBA that the project was for Hanlon, but we might be combining it with Sheehan. So I believe we did those walkthroughs. Somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we did the walkthroughs after we were into the program. We had a program in front of us, and we were going to start. We were going to be, moving forward with one. So we didn't do it at this stage. At this point, the only question in front of us is Sheehan versus Thurston. I can see how it would be helpful for the public to see both schools. We do need to be careful because, we're already into November. We need to make this decision in mid-December. It is disruptive to hold tours in the schools in that short period of time, but we can see what we can do. I don't know, Tim, if you have additional thoughts, but we
Yeah,
can see
no,
what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Typically, and I can say this from my experience in a former district as well too. Those tours happen later in the process, when there's a project potentially in front of the voters. I will say that to be clear about the decision the committee is making right now, the committee is not in December, the decision the committee is making in December. It's not whether or not to build a new school. It's not which option to make. It's about which school provides our greatest level of need and attention right now. And saying to the MSBA, we'd like to partner with you to try to help us find solutions for the school. Nothing commits any funding, nothing identifies a particular path forward. It's just saying that we are looking at this as our priority project. So just to be clear about, again, I think why that is a really important thing to do in the future, but I don't think it's necessarily essential at this stage in the process.
Okay, thank you. The next question is also from Ada Zong at 73 Partridge Drive. And this is a little bit longer. So I'd like to ask about the cost comparison between renovating Thurston Middle School and building a new one. In Doran Whittier's presentation, the numbers showed $73.9 million to renovate or keep Thurston and $155.5 million to build a new one. That's about an $86.1 million difference. But when I reviewed the capital improvement plan spreadsheet, I noticed that the $73.9 million includes about $14.57 million just for converting to an all-electric boiler system, along with several other large upgrades. If that $14.57 million cost is removed, the gap between renovating the building and the new building, the gap between renovating and building new grows about $96 million. My question is, can the town or Doran Whittier provide a clearer breakdown showing what is essential maintenance versus what is optional or green improvement at work? It would help the public, and I imagine the school committee as well, to see the two separate figures, one for necessary maintenance to keep the building functional and another for optional upgrades.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
yeah, so Ada, I think I agree with you. I think that information would be very helpful. I think it's a little early for us to be able to provide that information. The facility study was not a deep dive into these projects. If we go forward with a project, that's when we will do that deep dive. That's when we will really look at what is the cost of a capital improvement project, what we sort of call the do nothing or just fix the building project, versus how much will a new building cost. And when we do that in the feasibility study, that's when we really get into much more detail and sort of and honestly with more reliability on the numbers, what's going to make sense. Because if it does say, there's a 30 million difference between renovation and new, but that 30 million difference goes to 60 million because half of the stuff in the renovation we wouldn't do anyway, you're right, that's a different story. But we're not quite at that stage in this project yet. So
yeah, I would just say from looking at the capital improvement plan and the data there, and in particular for Thurston, I did not see that there was, Ada might be right. This is a distinct place where there is an upgrade that is a green upgrade that involves making that improvement. But for the most part, this wasn't a line that was in addition to other basic improvements. So if we peeled this off, I can say for sure that the electric, the boiler system, which they're trying to address, or the HVAC system, would have to be addressed anyway. So it would have to be substituted, with another cost item.
Right. So it might not be 14.5 million, but it could be 10 million.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
What I've understood, and I've talked to multiple engineers about Thurston's HVAC system in particular, because we've been monitoring it so closely, to continue to maintain the building to the best of our ability. And the HVAC system is a challenging one to maintain. And I think folks, if we ever do give tours, we'll see just why it's challenging and how, because the building has been expanded, And, there have been multiple construction projects over time. It's hard to even identify the zones and really control the system and calibrate it on a regular basis.
And that's helpful. Thank you, Lama.
Alrighty. So the next question is from Ada Zong at 73 Partridge Drive. I have a question about the accessibility trigger mentioned for Thurston Middle School in the statement that Thurston reaches the trigger point at 2.9 million per year or 8.7 million over 3 years. Is the 2.9 million a fixed number, or how exactly is that figure determined? I'm trying to understand what the threshold is based on, for example, whether it's set by regulation or calculated from the school's assessed value or project costs.
Yeah, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here. And I will admit that this is not my area of expertise, but just a quick search of some publicly available information from other communities. I believe it's 30% of the appraised value of the building. And so and I see Lemma nodding her head, so I will take. I know I didn't just let you answer this, Lemma. My apologies for that. But it is a formula that is set by the state based upon the appraised value of the building.
Okay. And this is I have a longer 2 parts question from Ada Zong at 73 Partridge Drive. I've been reviewing the different studies and data related to school enrollment, and I'm concerned that they don't all point in the same direction, which makes it hard to know what's really needed. For example, the Groper GIS report from September 2024 projects that enrollment will increase over the next 10 years. But the Westwood Fire Department's 2023 operations analysis found that the population aged 15 and under in Westwood will continue to decline. And when I look at the actual enrollment data, the numbers have gone down over the past decade. District enrollment from 2014 to 2015 was 3204 versus 2842 in 24 to 25. At Thurston Middle School, the enrollment was 798 from 2014 to 2015 versus 664 in 2024 to 2025. And Sheehan Elementary was enrollment 373 in 2014 to 2015 versus 278 in 2024 to 2025. Given these conflicting studies and the downward enrollment trend, I'm wondering how the school committee plans to make a decision this December about whether we need a new school, especially a larger, expensive one. Would it make sense to wait until next year to decide so we have another year of enrollment data and a clearer sense of which study is proving more accurate? If an enrollment continues to decline, we might not even need additional modular classrooms, let alone a brand new building. So I think the decision we're making right now is between Thurston and Sheehan and whether or not we're putting forward a request. What is it called, Maya? The
Statement of interest
to the MSBA. Yes.
Yeah.
Statement of interest
Yeah.
to the MSBA.
Yeah, we're not deciding whether or not we need a new school. And in fact, we would make that decision in a year or two, as you suggest in your comment, Ada. I also want to say that it's not just enrollment that's going to dictate whether we build a brand new school. It's also the condition of the existing facility, which from my perspective is a bigger issue than enrollment. I think we've managed various peaks and highs and lows in enrollments, and we will continue to manage those. It's really the condition of the existing building that gives me the most cause for concern, and the reason why I think we need to, consider something. We need to do something. I don't know what that is yet because we haven't gone through that study yet, the feasibility study, but I do think we need to do something with both Thurston and Sheehan and figure out a solution for those two schools. Tim, do you want to speak to the enrollment studies?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So Cropper GIS, who did the work with our current study, also did our work back, it was before I was here, but back in 2015, the last time we had done a study with SMA. That same firm back in 2015 predicted declining enrollment in the district, which played out. Obviously, when you're looking out 10 years, there's going to be a variation, but they have predicted decline from 2015 to 2025, which again, we've seen across the board. I also want to acknowledge that enrollment is generally cyclical. And I know in your question, You had talked about the enrollment decreasing over the last 10 years from 2014 to 2024. If you go back 10 years before that, enrollment increased by about the same amount that it went down over the last 10 years. So while our district-wide enrollment in 2024 was 2842, in 2014 it was 3204, in 2004 was 2761, right? So you can't just design for the just because something has gone that way for 10 years, if the previous 10 years it was increasing, you need to actually ride the wave of where enrollment is, not just look at that short-term trend. And that's honestly why there are people that are professional demographers that do this work and who are contracted. The other thing I would say about enrollment, if we are in partnership with the MSBA, they require as part of their feasibility process yet another enrollment study to be done. So that will be done at that point during the MSBA process. I can't speak to what what may have been part of the 2013 or 2023 fire station operational analysis. That's not, I haven't seen it. That's not the domain of certainly me or the committee. But I also want to acknowledge there is a difference between people aged 15 and under and school age children, because there's a whole group of people 0 to 5 that don't count in K through 5 or K through 8 enrollment.
Okay, the next question is from Jacob Goldberg at 49 Colby Way. What impact, if any, does federal funding impact cost reimbursement from MSBA and federal?
So the good news, and I say that word because it actually I think is good news in this case. MSBA's funding is determined by state statute that a penny of the sales tax goes to the MSBA to fund school building projects. So if there is an impact, it's a residual impact about how much money is in the economy. So essentially, the more sales that happen in the state, the more funding the MSBA gets. But there is no direct flow of funding from the federal government to the MSBA.
I will say that some of the programs that we took advantage of for Pine Hill were federal programs. They were specifically, one was COVID relief, and I'm forgetting the names of them, the American Rescue Act. And then the other one was in the Inflation Reduction Act. So that was in 2022 when inflation was sky high. So to the extent we were looking for additional savings outside of the MSBA, and we were hoping for federal programs to assist, those might be impacted. But to Tim's point, the MSBA reimbursement itself is limited to the state sales tax. So if people stop spending, it might go down, but it is statutorily funded.
And I feel like we should point out that when we're actually going to go and fund this, we're looking down the line quite a ways, and who knows what federal programs may or may not be in the works or available to us at that time.
Correct. Yep. Good point.
Okay. I have a comment from Kathy Wallace at 283 Farm Lane. In response to another resident's comment that Thurston is the highest priority, I suggest all residents visit the fire station and talk to the firefighters. You will see leaks, the sewage issues, the likelihood of mold and deteriorating apparatus floor, the structural issues requiring this building to be inspected regularly by a structural engineer, the lack of decontamination capabilities exposing our firefighters to significant illnesses, including cancer, and the lack of operational space. FS1 is the most critical infrastructure in town. This discussion should not be schools versus FS1. As a town, we need to solve both of these problems. So, a comment?
Yeah, I do. And I agree, Kathy. I think that, the town has issues with both the FS1 and with these, Sheehan and Thurston, and we need to address them as a town.
I think somebody pointed out that we just had a lot of buildings built all around the same time, and
yes,
much like our homes, they need to be addressed over time.
If I can just voice support for that too, Kathy, it's not either or, it's a both and it's how do we figure out how to make to address these needs as a town and comprehensively.
Okay, the next question is from Ada Zong at 73 Partridge Drive. I have a question about Thurston Middle School's capacity. According to the Doran Whittier 2025 presentation, Thurston's capacity is listed at 665, including the modular classrooms. However, in SMMA's 2014 capital needs study, Thurston's existing building capacity was listed at 759. That's about a 12% decrease over 10 years. So I'd like to ask for a clarification, and there are two questions. Why did Thurston's capacity drop by that much? Was it possibly a reporting difference or a typo? Or did actual changes like classroom reconfigurations, program adjustments reduce capacity? Thank you. I just want to understand what might have caused the difference.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't give an exact answer on this question because the SMMA report did not go into detail about their calculations about Thurston's capacity. But I can tell you from having the more detailed conversation in this study with Doran Whittier, really the changes around programmatic design, right? Doran Whittier's approach uses the MSBA approach, which looks at what happens inside of the building, how are classroom spaces being used, not just from a square footage perspective, but how are they being used educationally and operationally within the building. And for that, the biggest thing that has happened over the last 10 years has been the increased level of need to support our students with special needs, and the building of in-district programs so that we can service those students' needs in district and outside of district. So in some cases, that is a reconfiguration of classroom space where, although not reflected, for example, in this study, we added in last year's budget, because this was done after the study was completed, we added a new language-based classroom at Thurston because students were moving up from our program at Sheehan. Or we in the past have taken existing programs that may have taken a smaller individual classroom space that now take 2 full classroom spaces in the same building. That kind of program and the associated therapy spaces that go with it take up a different level of footprint in the building, and the net effect is an overall reduction in capacity. So while I can't speak with specificity to SMMA's calculations, that's the general reason why there's a reduction in capacity, because the level and type of programming and the individualized level of programming inside the district has changed over the last 10 years.
The next comment is from Fran Fusco at 20 Pine Lane. Why is Sheehan and Martha Jones an option? I haven't heard that Martha Jones was in deplorable shape. When Hanlon was chosen as the project, we heard the same story with Deerfield, and Sheehan being in deplorable shape, and ultimately Deerfield is still standing and being used. Why isn't the school department handing over Deerfield to the town now? Why the wait?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah. If you want to take the last part first, and then
Sure.
then I can take it.
So the school department, I believe, is going to make a decision about Deerfield in the next couple of months. There is a Deerfield committee that I believe is meeting one more time that's going to make a final recommendation on Deerfield to the school committee. So that decision will probably be made by the end of the year. Did you want to take the first part?
I can take the first part of that. Yeah. So the reason it's an option is when you actually look at MJ is certainly still standing and could continue to be operational, but there are some hidden liabilities in that building behind the wall that will happen over time, right? And so I know, for example, and compared to the needs at Sheehan and Thurston, the fact that we don't have air conditioning on the second floor of that building, it's not great, but that is certainly not, saying that to people who are at Sheehan or Thurston, that sounds like a luxury. I want to fully acknowledge that. But there are liabilities that happen over the next 10 to 20 years. So the reason it's explored as an option is to, again, not think about just what's happening in the immediacy, but if this takes another liability off the books down the road, that can help the long-term stability of the building infrastructure in the community. So we're not in the same place 50 years from now that we are now, where we had a whole bunch of things in the town as a whole done simultaneously and a whole bunch of little smaller buildings. That being said, if Sheehan is identified as the preferred option, the feasibility study would explore just Sheehan or combining Sheehan and MJ. Both would be explored in greater detail, and then a really informed decision could be made at that point in time. So that is not fully on the table or fully off the table right now, because that would be explored in feasibility.
Okay. There's a question from Ray and Jen Murphy at 98 Forbes Road. Can you comment on the educational impact of changing middle school to a 5-3-8 model? From our experience with friends and family in other towns, it seems this is a significantly negative change for students as well as staff. It also seems to be a decision made mostly in towns that don't have the same resources that Westwood does. In particular, this was done in Braintree and Hanover, where the communities voted down overrides to support robust school projects.
Yeah, so there is, and this is part of the reason why we talk about we would want to look at either a 5 through 8 or a co-located 5-6 upper elementary and 7-8. I want to acknowledge that there's two ways that a grade configuration change can happen. And the second way, which I can't speak with specificity about Braintree or Hanover, but based upon the context of a failed override, that's I would just kind of describe as a shotgun arrangement, where there's a financial pressure and something needs to be done in quick response to a budgetary pressure, and it's not a decision about education, it's a decision about budget. In terms of a building project that changes grade configuration, there are a lot of 5 to 8 districts in the state that have been that way for a long time. I think Natick is probably the one that is closest to us that has a track record of some success. When you do it as part of a building project, you can really have thoughtful discussions about how you design spaces, how you do staffing, how you can create, for example, a gradual transition from a one classroom, one teacher model in elementary school to a 4 classroom, 4 teacher team model that you see in middle school. And is there a bridge so that students get used to moving classes on a smaller scale beforehand? What I would say is that there are, the research doesn't identify any particular grade configuration model that makes the most sense educationally. It's really about what kind of education do you design in the building and how do you have the staffing and programming that supports it. And so again, I think if that decision were made, there's a long on-ramp while that building is being designed and built that would allow us to really answer those questions in a meaningful way that's best for Westwood, as opposed to being forced to do it in response to a budget crisis, which is, I'm guessing, people that are having negative experiences in other communities, that is more likely the case than not. So I don't know if, and I would say like that would be a process that would require a whole lot of like conversation, both obviously internally with our professional educators and with the community as a whole around that.
Okay. Jen Perkins, 17 Brook Street. Will there be an override needed at any point during the horizon of your plans?
So Westwood hasn't had an operational override since 2008. And to be clear, you do an operational override when your operating budget, which are the budget that recurs each year, right? It's not special projects, it's not capital projects, it's mainly salaries, utility costs, transportation costs, things you have to pay every year. When it seems like those costs are increasing more than the town can afford within the 2.5% Prop 2.5 that they're allowed to increase taxes. So that's when an override is contemplated. We haven't done one since 2008 for the schools. We work extremely hard, and we are honestly so blessed to have Lemma and Tim at the helm because they are geniuses. And we work extremely hard to each year when we're building the budget to build it within 2.5. We work very closely with the town. Remember, it's one pot of money. So the town and the school needs to figure out how to divvy up that one pot of money all within 2.5, so that nobody has to go for an override. The town doesn't want to go for an override. We don't want to go for an override. So we are working very hard not to have to do that. It is sort of a tight economic reality at the moment. I think everybody's feeling it, but we are going into the budget process right now. We've started, with budget steering meetings, and we are hopeful that we will not have to have one for this year. We try very hard not to do it. Haven't done it since 2008, and we've been successful at that. So at this, I guess the short answer is there isn't an override on the horizon. That's a long way of answering that question.
Okay. And that is the end of the questions.
Okay. So we're going to give everyone around 15 minutes back of your evening. I would like to thank everybody for joining. We had about 40 people join, which is great. We had some really good questions. And we all really appreciate the engagement from the community on this. If you have any additional thoughts that come to mind after after this session, you're welcome to either come to the next session or email the email address. Tim, maybe you can throw that email address in the chat.
You just did.
Oh, you just did.
You're on mute, Tim, but
Yeah, I just said what the rest of you just said. Yes, it's in the chat.
Excellent. Look at that. So that would be great. We are checking that and answering them as they come in. With that, it seems like, sorry, we have one more question.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Okay. Frank Vidiello, I apologize if I said that incorrectly, at 66 Stern Street. I have always supported the town and the elected officials. I agree we need a new fire station. I question why any time and money was spent looking at modules on the elementary schools when we just built a new $70 million plus elementary school, and we have an elementary school that has sufficient capacity for any overflow within the district. It seems like a waste of time and money. I think everyone would say redistrict, then spend millions more. Also, I question the growth of the school population, given that general statistics current birth rate of 1.7 kids per couple versus 2.1 for the replacement to stay steady, long-term trends, and new couples having fewer kids because of the expense. It just does not make any sense. What can you point to that shows that migration will bring in that many more kids to not only equalize the population, but to grow it?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the position that, it's not just enrollment that's going to dictate whether or not we need a new school. It's also the condition of the facility. So yes, we do have the capacity, according to the studies, to house all of the kids in the schools. And we could redistrict to do that, but that would include using Sheehan. So, and as we know that Sheehan has some serious issues with it. So ultimately, whatever solution we come up with has to address both in what people, what the enrollment situation is and what the existing facilities condition is. We're not there yet. I hate to keep saying that, but we aren't there yet. I think these are excellent questions. These are questions that we should be asked and that we should be able to answer. But when we have a project in front of us, right now, we're just deciding whether we put Thurston or Sheehan forward. And as in a statement of interest, if we don't get into the MSBA project, into the MSBA program, we have a whole different discussion in front of the school committee and in front of the town, and we need to reassess and go from there. But right now, the December decision that the school committee has to make is, are we going to put a statement of interest forward to the MSBA? And if so, will it be Thurston or Sheehan? So it's not that we can't answer these questions, it's that we're tabling them for when we actually do have a project, and all of these questions become much more critical and we have much more information to support the answers. I hope that doesn't feel like a non-answer, but yes, capacity is an issue, as is the condition of the building, as is coming up with a solution that addresses all of those things.
I would only clarify one thing, which is you answered the question, because I think the question's about elementary enrollment and capacity for elementary is completely separate from middle school, where the capacity issues are only solvable through modulars and not through redistricting. I just wanted to clarify that. In the elementary, certainly with the current buildings we have with redistricting and or modulars, the capacity can be addressed.
Yeah, but you're right, but not at the Thurston, without much.
Yeah, the last thing I would just add, and again, I don't think any of the six of us are professional demographers, but the actual demographic study you can find in the link that I shared previously to the facility study page. If you go into the folder, there is a document entitled Westwood Public Schools Mass 2024 Demographic. That is the entire Cropper report that you can feel free to go in there and see their analysis on that.
All right. I think that's it. So I don't see any more Q&A, and does anyone?
No. There is one more question.
We got one more.
Yep. So Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane. Do you Do you know how many students go to private school and what grades do they impact?
Not off the top of my head, but there is a report that the state generates on this. And so pardon me while I try to look this up really quickly. When we talk about private school, there are a total of, and this is not broken down by grade, I want to acknowledge that. There are 201 students from Westwood in the 24-25 school year in in-state private and parochial schools, and 3 in out-of-state private and parochial schools. That's called the School Attending Children Report from the Department of Education.
And so 201, and we have about 3,000 kids in the district?
Yeah, yeah. So in Westwood Public Schools, a little under 3,000. We look at all school-age children. It's a little over 3,000 because of that 200 delta. We also have a few students at, for example, vocational or agricultural schools. That School Attending Children Report lists all of that, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Any final questions? No? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think in order to close out this meeting, I will need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call. Dory,
Yes.
Joanna,
Yes.
and I am a yes. We are adjourned. I'd like to thank Tim and Lemma for joining us, and everyone on the Zoom for all the great questions. And, just keep paying attention to us, please. We would appreciate it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
you.
Westwood Media Center. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Wes.
Thank you.
Thank you.